Hello, BookTube. I've got another BookTube event to announce for you. You've already seen announcement videos, I bet. This is an older BookTube event. It's a few years old. It's Book Trek. It's the wrath of the summer of Trek. Coming to you in June, July, and August. This is captained by Vin at Revenant Reads. We have a great bridge crew of other BookTube channels. I will list them all down below, including the addition this year of a must-have for any Star Trek bridge crew, which is a chief engineer with a funny accent. We've added Randy Ray, the leader in Texas, who will be down nursing his wee bairns down in the engineering section. And what this is something that will be familiar to you if you've seen these before. This is reading Star Trek fiction all summer long. We have a wide variety of experience with Star Trek among our co-hosts. Some are relatively new. I think that the majority of our hosts are next-gen babies. They fell in love with Star Trek: The Next Generation. Once upon a time, I scoffed, but thanks to Book Trek, to Book Trek's past, I now see how that could happen, and more or less honor it. I have been with Star Trek from the very beginning, since before there was a Star Trek, when it was being announced in a magazine that used to come out that was wonderful called TV Guide. So I was, if I have an original genetic imprint for the show, it's the original series. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. But although our hosts, our bridge crew, is all over the map when it comes to their essential or their favorite iterations of Star Trek, whether it be the original series or Next Generation or Star Trek Discovery or just kidding. No one likes Star Trek Discovery, not only in our crew, but anywhere in the world. It is entirely supported by vengeful blue-haired slacktivists who don't watch it. They just support it and attack the people who criticize it. But it doesn't have any fans. But all the other Star Treks do. And all the other Star Treks warrant them. But despite the fact that all of our co-hosts are all over the map when it comes to stuff like that, we do have a lot in common. I think that that a lot of us recognize the best in Trek. I doubt there's very much that there's a co-host who would say that one particular moment, one particular episode, one particular show was absolutely great when all the others disagree, unless that's me. Probably it would be me if it would be anybody. And one other thing that is common among a lot of co-hosts, certainly it's true with Vin, our dauntless captain, and also with me, which is that for whatever reason, Star Trek is a summer thing. Now, part of that is understandable in the sense that Star Trek blockbusters tended to run in theaters in the summer. The movies tended to run in theaters in the summer, which you'd think would mean that Star Trek would not be a summer thing for me. It was slushy, cold, dark sleet for most of the times that I watched Star Trek on an absolutely gigantic TV. And the younger viewers are going to say, oh yeah, you had an absolutely gigantic TV. Yeah, what model did you have? Was it synced with your home thermostat? Did you have it mounted on the wall? No, I mean it was a huge wooden cabinet of a cathode TV. There was a huge flat top to it. It was wood. It had panels on the side that could be opened so that things could be put in them. And it got 3 stations. And you were lucky if it got 3 stations. And it cost an enormous amount of money. And you certainly weren't going to throw it away. Despite that fact, Star Trek very much is imprinted for me on the summer. I think for one reason more than any other, and that is Star Trek 3, my favorite Star Trek movie, which was the only movie worth watching, playing for one endless, gorgeous summer in a small town in Iowa. There was one movie theater, and it played this movie, I think, 4 times a day. So noon, afternoon, and then 2 times at night, 2 shows at night. And I just watched it endlessly. I went and watched it over and over again. There were no VCRs then. There was no cable television then. There was no internet then. And there was no air conditioning just about everywhere then. Instead, I just went there and watched that movie over and over again. I loved it so much that I watched it over and over and over and over and over again. And that was all summer. I would go out and about. I would meet people. I would swim laps at the pool, uh, and maybe do some biking. And then I would watch Star Trek. That Star Trek 3 over and over and over again. And that imprinted for a whole summer. I think that's probably what did it for me. Uh, and so we are putting a Star Trek event together for the summer of Trek. So June, July, and August. So you have a little time to go to your library book sales, the nearby library book sales, or your used bookstore or whatnot, and get a few Star Trek novels. You don't need a few. If you read one piece of Star Trek fiction in the course of the summer, you have participated in Book Trek. Or if you have participated in our away missions, we have 2 side away missions if you want to do those. One is to read Star Trek ancillary work, some work of nonfiction written by a Star Trek person. So all of the memoirs that were incredibly heavily ghostwritten, you could read one of those instead, or How To, or The Beginning of Trek, Star Trek Lives, or whatnot. You could read nonfiction accounts of Star Trek, things like that. Or the other away mission is to read a work of science, a work of nonfiction work about a scientific subject. Because Star Trek brought science into the living room. It brought science into the living room of America, where all of a sudden you were seeing all kinds of things that were real. They weren't just hauled out of nowhere because the prop department needed them that week and they're gone the next week. They were so consistent that you actually started to wonder how they work. What is a tricorder? These little things that Kirk and his crew have, they're like walkie-talkies, but they can cover thousands of miles. They're these little handheld communication devices. What could that be? But you started to get to know what they were like. For the first time ever, the characters would fiddle with their technology, and sometimes the technology didn't work the way they wanted it to. Sometimes it had limitations or went on the fritz. To me, it wasn't the huge things like phasers or transporters. To me, it was the little things. Handheld communication devices that act instantaneously, no dialing, no paper anywhere on the Enterprise. Doors that open without you needing to fiddle with them. They open when you come near them. Amazing. Absolutely. And also, what seemed like a handheld version of, what's that thing they have in California? I read an article about it in Popular Science. A computer. That's right. But it's as big as a room. But here it is. This person's holding it in their hand. I watched all of those things, and I not only watched them, but they didn't feel like MacGuffins. It felt like they were, like the people in this future were working with their technology the same way that we had tried to figure out how to get this TV to work by moving the knobs. It felt the same way. So a science away mission is certainly a possibility. If you don't feel like reading Star Trek fiction, some of you, I don't imagine that anyone is going to be drawn into the orbit of Summer of Trek, the Wrath of Trek, if you're a book snob. And book snobs won't have any interest in reading Trek fiction at all. So I don't imagine that there are any, but if you are one and somehow were drawn into the orbit of this thing, you could read a work of popular science instead. If you do just that, you've participated in Book Trek, the Summer of Trek, the Wrath of the Summer of Trek. I will naturally be not so much the second away mission, but the second away mission, reading a work of popular science. I will do that in the course of things anyway. I read the new releases in the American book market in the 15 or 16 genres that interest me, and science is one of those genres. And there are a whole bunch of interesting titles coming out this summer, a whole bunch of them. So I'll be doing that away mission anyway, but the main thing that I'll be doing is the thing that I tend to do with book events like this, with booktube events like this. Not always. Sometimes there are exceptions. In April, there was a glowing exception. But sometimes with book events like this, what I tend to do is overdo things. Make a video a day or something like that. And I think that I will for Book Trek. I don't read Star Trek the rest of the year, and I love it. 2 projects have been put before me for the summer. One was put together was suggested to me by our chief engineer, Randy Ray. He suggested that he and I read the Shatner Verse novels, all of them, and maybe even talk about them. What William Shatner got in touch with Judith and Gar Reese-Stevens, a fantastic Star Trek writing duo. They're responsible for some really good Star Trek fiction. He got in touch with them, Shatner did, and came up with a whole bunch of ideas. A whole bunch of ideas for what would be the future adventures of Captain Kirk. Because the one thing that William Shatner did not like was that Paramount killed Captain Kirk. He did a great job of it. He was great. He's great in that movie. In Star Trek Generations, he's fantastic. But Shatner didn't like it. And the Shatner Verse, the entire premise of the Shatner Verse is that Jim Kirk doesn't die on Viridian 3. And it goes on from there. And it gives, I mean, Judith and Gar Reese-Stevens, they have to deal with the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's Shatner's name who's going to sell these things, and he's the driving force behind it. But it's not Star Trek continuity at all. And so fans have embraced the books that you can't read them without a smile on your face, but fans have gently shunted them off into their own separate reality, the Shatner Verse, that is not part of either the shared reality of Star Trek fiction, or certainly canonical reality for the TV shows and the movie. It's not part of either one. It's its own separate thing. Some people pointed out, myself included, that all Star Trek fiction is that way. Because no Star Trek fiction is not done like Star Wars fiction, where there's an overarching egomaniacal lunatic who wants to make sure that everything fits into one mosaic of continuity. The Star Wars extended universe is one little mosaic tile, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then another. And you can't quite make out the pattern, but one person can. And in 100 years, when you put all those 10,000 books together, the mosaic will be the face of George Lucas. Of course, all the people who contributed to that and still do were livid when Kathleen Kennedy threw out the extended universe and said, no, don't care. We bought this from you, old man. We don't care what you think about it. And started making bad Star Wars movies. But that's the way the Star Wars extended universe was done. That's very much not the way that the Star Trek extended universe was done until just comparatively recently. Now it is. Now there is a concerted effort to make every novel fit with every other novel. I was vocally against that. I still am. That is a keep out sign to new readers. But for a long time, for 50 years, that wasn't true. The books were happy little universes on their own. And they all had subtle contradictions with each other. So, in a way, I was arguing that the Shatner Verse is not all that much of a desecration of Star Trek, but the prospect of reading all of them, I don't know about that. I will probably end up doing it. I don't know that I'll be the better for it. I haven't read a lot of those books except but once, and only when they first came out. The other project that was suggested to me by one of you is a little more congenial to me, although it's a lot more familiar ground. One of you cut your teeth on the old pocket Star Trek novels. A lot of them had Timescape banners at the top. And I loved those things as they were coming out. For a lot of those things were Star Trek when we had no Star Trek, when the only Star Trek that existed was the original series and reruns, and that was it. Or the animated series. We had nothing else. And those pocket Star Trek novels were everything, even when they were terrible. One of you suggested, why don't you just read through all of those? I've done a lot of those in previous book treks and talked about them. And I've also read all of those books many times each. So that feels a little bit less inviting even than the Shatner Verse, which at least would be relatively new to me. I don't know. I might do both. And there might be a lot more. The one problem with the Shatner Verse and the pocket science Star Trek projects is that neither one of them deals with the rest of the franchise. They don't deal with Voyager. Well, I mean, all the characters from all of the original Roddenberry era Star Trek, except for Enterprise, show up in the Shatner Verse, but not themselves, not the real version, so to speak. But the pocket paperback thing barely touches on anything else. And I kind of want to celebrate all of Star Trek, except Star Trek Discovery. I kind of want to celebrate all of it. So I don't know. I've got a month to decide, and we've got 3 months to indulge in this event. Probably I have time for everything. But either way, you have time to prepare. So if you have a Star Trek novel, or if you like Star Trek and have never read a Star Trek novel, now's the time. Or if you see them at your library book sale or your used bookstore, and you've always wondered, maybe you read one or two and liked them and want to try another one, now's the time. Get some books lined up for the summer, whether it's Star Trek or whether it's popular science, and join us for the Summer of Trek, the wrath of the Summer of Trek. I think it's going to be a good deal of fun. And of course, throughout June and July, I will be advocating, as I do every year, for a live stream with my co-hosts. It won't happen. Of course, it won't happen. They all have jobs and loved ones and progeny and daily commitments and personal hygiene, and so it'll never be possible to get everybody together for a live stream. I'll still advocate for it. I think it would be wonderfully fun. But in the meantime, I have you. So there's a BookTube event on your horizon. Take May to prepare, and then we will launch together from Utopia Planitia on the 1st of June, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.